Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. They are Jeff and Bryan.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Bryan. How are you?
Well, Jeff, I think I'm hearing things.
Hearing things? What are you hearing?
Well, I've got this constant moaning in my head from this book.
Oh, that's interesting, because I keep looking out the window and I see that my grass is always constantly mowed.
Oh, yes, I see. The many moons of moan.
Yes. Well, here we are. This is part 2 of And Another Thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to jump right in.
You bet.
With Chapter 7. If you've not listened to the first episode, go ahead, listen to the previous episode of part 1. I can't promise you that it will clear anything up or make any sense.
But that's what we're here for.
Yes.
Distribute confusion and frightening images to small children all day.
Absolutely. All right, so at the beginning of Chapter 7, Wowbagger's ship reappears in real space.
Mm-hmm.
Random and Wowbagger continue to bicker at each other until Wowbagger can't take it anymore. And
He tubes her.
Absolutely. She gets imprisoned and sedated in an acrylic tube.
Mm-hmm.
And when the tube came down, it cut off the tip of her index finger. And Trillian seemed to be enraged, and Wowbagger felt that it was no big deal because he basically just threw it up into the air, the ship absorbed it, and it reattached onto her hand. So,
amazing technology in that dark matter ship.
Yes, evidently, what we didn't mention earlier is when Arthur got out of his shower and body optimizer, he could see again, he could hear again, he had no aches and pains. So it is sort of a all-in-one med lab or med bed that takes care of everything.
And the odd part, of course, is that the fact that the ship is an antimatter ship and they are all made of matter, it doesn't explode.
Right, yes. There's a thin barrier.
Oh, I see. So all their medical barrier things, yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, and on that ship, they were also told they couldn't even look outside because they can't even look at dark space.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So after Random gets tubed, Wowbagger and Trillian get into an argument that ends with them gazing into each other's eyes and leaning in for a kiss. At that moment, the sedation wore off of Random, and she regained consciousness in her tube and went berserk.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
And this is where they kind of explain that the amount a child is repulsed by the romantic interest of their parent it's like proportional. Like the more the parent likes a being, the more the child is going to dislike the being.
That's correct. The step-parent phenomenon.
Right.
So while Random is in the tube, of course, Wowbagger discovers that she's got nicotine in her lungs and tar, etc.
Right.
So he asks Trillian if he should get rid of it, and she says, sure, why not?
So then we jump to Asgard, and Zaphod is having difficulty with his balance being off because he's only got one head now. And he's only taking in half the air since left brain has been removed.
Right. And the other thing is that he's lost the heels to his boots, which were made from silver.
Right.
Silver gathered from the silver-tongued devils.
Right.
Which he had to take many of to create the heels that got melted away on his boots.
Yes.
And I thought that was interesting. I guess is the best word I could use for that whole sequence with the silver-tongued devils.
Yes. Right. So an out-of-breath, off-balance Zaphod is sent out over the bridge and dragons are sent after him.
Mm-hmm.
However, coincidentally, Zaphod uttered the passphrase and his boots bonged out the fail-safe bongo code as he ran to activate and fire the laser cannons.
Mm-hmm.
And the cannons shot some of the dragons.
Right.
I don't remember what that passphrase was. Do you remember what the passphrase was?
No, I don't remember what it was.
Compliments to the underbrazier. So as I mentioned, there was a passphrase and a bongo code that would release the laser cannons.
Right.
That would kill whatever was on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to lose some dragons. But there was only two ways, or there was a set of two things, the passphrase and the bongo code. The bongo code was Zaphod's gait with his heelless boots as he ran across the bridge, exactly pounded out the bongo code.
Correct.
To me, that's okay, kind of funny. In the world of infinite improbability, I understand how that can happen. The password phrase was compliments to the underbrazier, which he just blurted out for no reason, and the excuse was because it seemed appropriate. But nothing before that would make you think he would yell that.
Right, and it's somewhere in the story here, where, earlier I think, where they mentioned that Zaphod has ADHD or some version of it, you know, and he doesn't ever remember the combination of letters, so he goes to his doctor and tells his doctor that he has DDH or something like that, and so his doctor prescribes him some hemorrhoid medication because that's double dose hemorrhoids is the DDH.
Oh, yeah.
And Zaphod eventually had to stop taking the medication because he couldn't keep it down.
Right.
So, I mean, we don't want to downplay this book too much. There are some funny scenes in the book. That to me was one of them.
Yes, but there's too much in the book that makes you wait to get there.
Yeah.
And you get taken out of it, and you're, why does he mean this, or how did this possibly happen?
Right, and you had mentioned even before where his continuing use of the phrase "porm wrangler," and here he uses "porm wrangler" or "porm wranglers" as a verb.
Right.
Whereas earlier in the book he used it as a noun.
Right.
So we're not sure. And they never define, I mean, we make assumptions based on the context, but they don't define what that is or what that means.
No. And for those of you listening, it's P-O-R-M.
Right.
W-R-A-N-G-L-E-R.
Right.
Porm Wrangler.
Right. So again, he's attempting to be funny by coming close to something that doesn't mean anything.
Yes, changing one letter when phonetically, when you're listening to it like I did, you can't really discern a difference.
Right, exactly.
So anyway, Zaphod is running across the Rainbow Bridge, and the cannons are firing at the dragons, and Zaphod was just about to the wall when he was caught by Heimdall.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, well, that's it for him. How could he possibly get out of that? And then Zaphod remembered that Thor, on a drunken night, decided to tell him about the gods and that they have these monikers.
Secret names.
And if you know their secret name and say their secret name, they have to be nice to you.
Correct. It's one of those things where if you phrase a question 3 times, then they're forced to answer it.
They're forced.
Yeah. Oh, no, wait a minute. That's a new set of questions, so it doesn't count. And that scene is actually done pretty well in the Austin Powers movie.
Right.
Who sent you? You'll have to kill me. Who sent you? Kiss my ass, Powers. Who sent you? Dr. Evil.
That was easy.
That was easy.
Why did you tell us?
I can't stand to be asked the same question 3 times. It just irritates me. Where's Dr. Evil's secret volcano lair? I spit at the question. Do I really have to ask you 2 more times? Go to hell, Powers. Fine. Where is Dr. Evil's secret volcano lair? I will take it to the grave with me.
Aha! You have to answer. He asked you 3 times.
No. The second question was, do I really have to ask you 2 more times? So that would be the first question in a new line of questioning and wouldn't count in the other line of questioning. He's right.
Anyway.
Okay, where were we?
So, yes, where were we? We were talking about Will Ferrell in the Austin Powers movie.
Yes.
And the slavishly devoted to the 3-question format.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So in the same way that Heimdall had to do everything that Zaphod wanted after he called him Bent Stick.
Right. Bent Stick.
No. Zaphod was let in, and he was told where to find Thor.
Mm-hmm. Right before we get to Chapter 8,
Okay.
Wowbanger and Trillian have a conversation.
Okay.
And there's a little reference to a comment that Wowbanger says, "Oh, that's right, you humans like to make fun of your lineage. What are you going to call me, cheeky monkey?"
Right. Right.
I thought that was a pretty good line.
Right. So Thor is in a bar, and Zaphod gets to the bar, and he's told that he can have 1 drink with Thor.
Right.
And Zaphod then said, 1 beer? Okay, I'll sip. Yeah.
And then we hear inner thoughts. It says, if Left Brain could have intercepted this thought, it would have laughed bitterly and proclaimed that there was about as much chance of Zaphod Beetlebrox just sipping as there was of a mouse giving a straight answer to a simple question.
Right.
In other words, a complete reference to our friends Benji.
And Frankie.
And Frankie.
Yes. Absolutely. So he does work in these little things that don't necessarily take you out of the book, and it's a nice callback to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to Chapter 8. We're back on Wowbagger's ship. And it says Ford went on U-bid and ran up charges on the guide's Dino Charge card. Random comes in and talks with Ford long enough to steal, use, and replace his Dino Charge card.
Exactly.
I find it interesting because in the previous book where he stole the Dino Charge card, which would have been mostly harmless, there had to be a restaurant review that made the charges accepted.
Right.
So now all of a sudden you just can use it willy-nilly and Random can steal it and there's no waiting for the review. So
except that what would be funny is that, remember, he's been in that construct for 100 years.
Right.
Using an imaginary card.
correct.
And an imaginary way. And now he's back in the real world for less than a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that he's written anything, but he's talked about possibly writing things.
True.
And then when he does get to Nano later, he does suggest that he will be writing things to justify the card. But I do think it's kind of funny here where Random is not happy and she comes in and manages to smile long enough at Ford just to steal the card.
Yeah.
And I love the t-shirt designs, which come back again here. This is the second time there's a t-shirt thing. They talk about Zaphod's t-shirts earlier and the selling of his t-shirts, but here they talk about a new t-shirt design that says, "I believe, don't eat me."
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I kind of got a kick out of that. And of course, when we finally do get to the bar,
Right.
what does Zaphod see but the Valkyries?
Mm-hmm.
And he's thoroughly impressed with these young ladies, which, as we understand, based on the description, are like 12 times taller than he is.
Yes.
So he goes running across the bar top over to where the Valkyries are, and all of a sudden he's like caught, stuck, and he's feeling around like a mime just to realize that he is in fact stuck in a shot glass.
Right, he's stuck under a shot glass.
Because Thor has stopped him from running across the table. I don't know. I found the whole sequence, as I said before, a little tedious.
Right.
Thor is playing with his chess set, which is talking to him before he gets there, and I don't know.
Right. There was a point on Wabagger's ship where Arthur is, again, feeling sorry for himself like he always does, and he's complaining, and the computer's trying to tell him that he's lucky.
Right.
And he's like, lucky? How can I be lucky? Everywhere I go, things get blown up. And he's told, but not you.
That's right. Everywhere he goes, they do get blown up, but he doesn't.
Yeah. And he's got a beautiful daughter, but he keeps losing love, and he wants to know what it is, and he settles for tea. So he's trying to complain, but it's kind of like, what were we talking about in that other episode? I had this thought, and it just right out my head. Where it's like, but it's not him. Do you know it's...
Right.
The thought's gone. If it comes back, maybe I can work it in somewhere else. Kind of in reference, I think, to what you were talking about, tedious things in the Zaphod story arc. He's on Asgard, and he's looking for Thor, and he discovers that Asgard is full of zombie-like reanimated Vikings who are the civil servants.
Right.
And they're picking up dry cleaning, or they're walking dogs, and Zaphod gets to a magic tree and says the magic word, or at least magic words. Trees are fruity, and the door opens to let him in. So that's another part that happened just before he got to the bar that just seemed ridiculous. So then on Nano, Hillman Hunter is continuing his interviews for a god, and he meets Gaia, the Earth Mother, and there was no way she was getting the job, like you were mentioning.
Right, exactly. But what's interesting about Hillman, they talk a little bit about him being too Irish.
Yeah.
And that if you're truly Irish, then the first thing you do is, if you're entertaining or meet another Irishman, you inquire about the health of you too.
Right.
I did kind of think that was a little funny. But then he learns from his nano, or not his grandmother, that people buy comfort. And if he can make people comfortable, then he can sell them anything.
Yes.
And that becomes his quest in life, to be able to sell people anything. So he affects this Irish brogue accent and lifestyle in order to make people comfortable.
So I want to talk about where Thor gets into the bar and he finds Thor. And Thor's, like you were mentioning, playing chess.
Yeah.
And Thor threw his hammer at Zaphod, and it just stops an inch from Zaphod's face. And then it basically hurted him and backed him up against a wall, because Thor does not want anything to do with Zaphod because of a previous incident. So the chess set offered to kill Zaphod, and that tells me that my question about milliways before was probably because Thor killed him if he went over there. So maybe that's why Zaphod didn't...
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we have to assume that, because what we haven't talked about is what happened. We don't know really the story.
But there is this really, really bad joke that is written as a really, really bad joke that you're like...
That's a bad joke.
That's a bad joke, and did you really need to put it in your book? So Zaphod is on his way over to Thor, and there's an open stool next to him, and he comes over and decides he's going to tell a little joke to lighten the mood. When he sits down next to Thor, he says, "I can never pass a nice stool, ba-dum-bum." And I'm like, wow, really?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to his hemorrhoid problem.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh my gosh.
So previously, Zaphod had talked Thor into doing a video for the Subetha, which we were talking about the social networks earlier.
Right. They were on tour in a singing group.
Yes. And this video that they made went viral, and it was very embarrassing for Thor. And Zaphod wants to make another video to have people forget about that first one, but to put him back on top.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is Nano and that whole thing with Hillman Hunter.
Right.
But give us a little more of Hillman's backstory.
Right. So I think we mentioned it before about Hillman Hunter, and this is where they talk about the fact that he had invented a religion, and he then basically convinced all these rich people to invest money with him, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how he became the owner of the island Innisfree in Ireland, right?
Right. What his goal was is he wanted to gather all the rich people into a single place,
right?
So he could sell to them more easily instead of having to travel the whole earth.
Exactly.
So that's when he bought an island and he built a resort,
right? And
he started a very simple religion. Mm-hmm. But then he got a call from somebody.
Right. That's when he hears from Zaphod. Right.
And came to Earth.
Yep.
While Ford was there, after Ford was there. Mm-hmm. When did this happen?
Yeah, and this is where the story just kind of goes incredibly nutty. But one thing that I did think was funny in this story is they talk about the fact that after he bought his island, the floodgate opened.
Right.
And in fact, that's when he wiped out his beach on his island because the floods wiped out his beach, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yes.
But then there's another reference to T-shirts here where it says that on his island of Innisfree, you could be recognized as part of the religion by wearing a T-shirt that says, "Be rich and wear a T-shirt."
Right.
You're right. This is where Zaphod calls him up on his cell phone.
Right.
Which doesn't have the feature of
video phone,
but it still
worked anyway.
Yep.
And he got hung up on.
And I think the funniest line during that whole sequence is when Zaphod says to him, "Your accent is confusing my fish."
Right. That was a great line.
And it doesn't happen with these other monkeys.
Yes. I think they say something, and I don't know if this is exactly it, but the less Hillman Hunter wants to talk to you, the thicker his accent gets, or something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
He wants to dissuade you from talking to him, so he'll really turn up the accent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Magrathea built this planet, and Hillman, head of the Nanites, had trouble with the contractors. This whole thing didn't make sense because it really makes Magrathea look like idiots.
Right.
So I don't know the purpose of that line making them... Yes, it's a joke about contractors.
Yeah, that, and you're right. Sometimes he just sticks things in there just to stick them in there. And this whole sequence where he talks about the contractors, and there's only one person in history that ever got a change order past a contractor, and he did that by going back in time and putting it in place. Well, that's not really a trick. It's just going back in time and putting in the correct order.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So that was kind of a dopey thing there. But but like you said, that's what I don't like about this sequence, and what bothers me the most is that we understand that the Magratheans were fabulously wealthy.
Yes.
I mean, beyond the scope of the galaxy. In fact, they put themselves to sleep because there was no one in the galaxy or universe, really, that could afford their services anymore.
Right, and it's one of those, if you go back to what we said about everything is possible.
Right.
So, Magrathea was asleep.
Right.
Until the Earth was destroyed.
Correct.
Therefore,
or as we kind of suggested, within 7 days
of when
the Earth was to be destroyed.
So you have that. Now you have to start saying, well, we've already learned that there's infinite number of different universes and an infinite number of other Earths. Mm-hmm. In one of those universes, is there an open and active Magrathea that didn't fall into myth?
Yeah.
When you start dealing with infinite multiple universes and time travel, you can, well, let's use the term reverse engineer anything you want. You can go back and say, well, this is how it happened. He went to this alternate universe, to this Magrathea that was still open for business and running a sale. But
right,
no
because
way.
it does say that Zaphod got the planet at a discount or something.
Right.
But
and we will learn that there are 2 groups on Nano from Earth. Actually, 2 different Earths in 2 different universes. So he is playing with the multiple universe. So we don't know what universe we're in.
Right.
We don't know what he went to. I don't know how you travel between them or bring people from one to the other without ships, I guess, like the Heart of Gold. Or
This whole sequence kind of makes me cringe because first off, we know that, I mean, they mentioned that Hillman Hunter's interactions with Zaphod was when Zaphod had one head.
Right.
Which we mentioned, I think, right?
Yep.
Well, we talked about his one head, but not that the timeline gets screwed up because of that. Because Hillman's on the phone with Zaphod. Zaphod's got one head, so we know it's after he had his head removed. So, but the sequence that we understand time-wise is the construct literally lasts micro minutes or whatever. And so in the timeline of Zaphod's life, minutes should have passed.
Right.
But he's gone to Magrathea. He's bought a planet. He's gone back to Earth. He's moved
multiple
a whole bunch
Earths.
of pieces. Right. In the past.
Yeah. He brought one Earth colony to Nano and it worked so well, he went and got another one. And now it's working so well, he wants to go to a new Earth and get a 3rd colony.
Right. When I first heard the idea that Zaphod went to the Earth and picked up a colony of people, it kind of worked for me a little bit because it was suggested in the book that Zaphod had visited Earth when Ford was there. And Ford was there for how many years? Like 7 years?
15.
15 years.
Yes.
So it kind of worked, but it didn't because Zaphod would have had 2 heads back then.
Yeah.
So,
Well, how about this to add to the confusion and the problems? So let's just say you were Zaphod and you did sell this planet to this gentleman to have his colony so he could start his religion and sell things to people. Zaphod brought more people. It's his planet. He probably even sold that planet to the other group.
Right.
But how do you sell a planet to somebody and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to bring more people over, more yous over?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. That's why we brought it up. It says that Zaphod made a profit in this deal.
Right.
How could he have paid for it when we know it's beyond the scope of any universal client currently existing? So,
right. Everything is possible.
I guess. But nothing makes sense.
No, absolutely not.
Anyway, back to the story.
So aside from the trouble with the contractors that I was talking about, which basically was they never told the contractors that the houses were supposed to have windows. So they built all the houses without windows. And not only that, but there were servants who were brought to serve the rich, and they revolted because they believed that they were equal on this new world. And there was even a cheese-related religion that started on its own, and those who did not join the religion would suffer e-damnation. And this is why Hillman had to get a god fast.
Right.
And so that's why he started his interviews, because things were getting out of control and the people were revolting and they thought they were equal, and he needed to establish a pecking order.
Right. And what was happening was all of the folks that had been brought to support the rich people decided that they should be equal. And that's when things went out of control for him. But the funny thing is, the Tyromancers, or the cheese people, were the rich people, not the poor people.
Right.
So They didn't have their masseuses. They didn't have their fitness instructors. All of their cooks and maids all were leaving them and living on the beach with each other.
Right.
And you get the biggest kick out of some of the scenes where the fitness instructors are carrying around the masseuses on their shoulders.
Right.
The one scene, and I still can't quite figure this out, they describe the fitness instructor carrying a bicycle in one arm and a fitness instructor, and a masseuse on the shoulder of the other arm.
Right.
And then Arthur or somebody says, well, why are you doing that? And they're like, why do you care?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
What the hell?
Right.
Anyway, a little out of sequence, but so is the story.
So a name that bugged me, I don't know why, is coming up right now, and that was the person who started the cheese religion.
The Tyromancers.
Yeah, the leader of the Tyromancers is Acide Preflux, which I'm going to say is a very Douglas Adams type of name because it does sound just like acid reflux, but there is nothing in there that is it. He just put a P in front of reflux. He didn't change it. If it was Douglas Adams, it wouldn't be ASEEDPREFLUX.
Right.
It would be FLUCKS or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
You need to change it a little more, but that's closer than the other ones.
At one point, they introduce the character Buff Orpington.
Okay, yes.
And they, and Owen here makes a joke, basically, about the Prosser character.
Okay.
He says that Buff Orpington was a Viking warrior in his ancient past.
Right.
So blah, blah, blah. So like Prosser. It's a direct ripoff.
Correct.
Okay.
Rip-off is a good word.
And that's what I thought. I really kind of felt like that was a ripoff.
That was not an homage to...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then right there, in that sequence of event, one of the characters says, "Listen to that din. Odin." Did you remember that?
I didn't remember that.
I mean, what the heck? Stupid line.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You don't remember that?
I don't remember it. I blocked it out of my head because I think I was still roiling about...
I know. I don't know why he stuck this little reference to Odin, and it's just like out of the blue.
Yes, yes. And it's one of the things that I want to say I enjoy is if there is a book where the author, I'm going to say, is too smart for me. Mm-hmm. So you read it and you get to a point and there's something out of place that you go, well, that didn't make any sense. And then you look back 4 lines and you go, oh, all right, now I see, but my brain didn't follow that logic, but I know why it was done. Mm-hmm. This you can't.
No. It's just kind of a random statement. And again, another little ripoff he just sticks here at the end is about the lemon-wrapped gold brick, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the other thing that kind of bothered me a little bit in here is that they act like the only drink in existence is the Gargle Blaster.
Right.
And they mention it over and over again. And it's supposed to be, in the theory of the book, like the high-end, super expensive drink, you know?
Right.
Sprinkled with samphire.
Right, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's not just a Long Island iced tea.
Right. It's not something you're going to pick up, but it's like the only drink people can drink in this story, which makes me a little cuckoo.
Yes. It's hard to follow this whole bit of logic here, so I'm not going to try and lay it all out, but what I did find a little bit amusing was that we have the Tyromancers and cheese, and there are chefs who make these great cheese crepes, and they get kidnapped, and there's these 2 factions that are fighting over these chefs. And at that moment, Zaphod arrives with Thor on the Heart of Gold using the Infinite Improbability Drive, and as it's winding down, a giant wheel of cheese appears in the sky, and all the fighting stops because their god has arrived.
Right, and they see damnation in the tree.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's an effect of the improbability drive.
Right. It just happened at the exact right time, coincidentally. So we get to chapter 9, and Wildbagger's longship, that used to be Thor's, is traveling through dark space again. And normal beings cannot handle being in dark space, as we mentioned, and a glimpse of it is like a dozen near-death experiences. It said that there was not a single passenger who had not been substantially altered by it, then lists the passengers and their states of mind. So as they're traveling through dark space, all the regular people get messed up. So Trillian is trying to figure out if she should go away with Wildbagger or if she should give Zaphod or Arthur another chance. So she's having relationship crisis. Random wants revenge for being put in the tube. And she has researched a way to kill an immortal like Wildbagger. Wildbagger is trying to decide between Trillian and death. Do I want to die? Or do I want to go on
hang out with Trillian for a little while?
Arthur is having a conversation with himself, trying to convince himself that it's time to move on and put the memory of Fenchurch away forever. And Ford has a non-blinking contest with himself. He lasted 8 minutes. He then started making up songs. Then he realized he should write an entry for the guide about Wildbagger's, formerly Thor's, ship. He was not sure what the perfect write-up would be and reduced it down to one word. Fruity. So I guess he's now self-editing.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe that one word is what allowed the credit card to work.
Maybe, yes. That could be.
They refer to Trillian later, just beyond this part, as the lucky gal that bagged the bagger.
Right. So Wildbagger also arrives to Nano, and he's excited because Thor's there already. And nobody expects Zaphod to have followed through with killing Wildbagger. So,
or Zaphod to have followed through
with anything. Right.
Nobody expects Zaphod. The people of Nano, at least the Tyromancers, are excited because Wildbagger knows the cheese god. Old Cheesy.
Right. Oh, yeah. Old Cheesy.
Oh, my gosh. And the fact that the cheese god even exists is ridiculous.
Right. And at this point right here is where we learn a little bit more about Zaphod telling Hillman that he's very pleased how easy it was to get an Earth colony to Nano and how much money he made through Hillman. And he decided to go to another Earth in another dimension and do it again with a seed.
Mm-hmm.
So a seed and Hillman are the same person on multiple Earths.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout this book, everybody sees a complete comparison between the two that Hillman never seems to see because he hates a seed preflux. He absolutely hates him and arrogant, loud, just all these things that he is.
Yes.
He sees in the other one and just absolutely hates him. So I did kind of like that fact as a storytelling device, but trying to fit it into the timeline of when could this possibly have happened is virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm. Now we're coming up on a part, I don't know whether... I'm fairly certain that you thought this was really significant.
Okay.
So I will mention that we are coming up on the part where they start to talk about vacuum-inducing statements.
Okay.
Do you remember this?
I vaguely do right now, but
okay.
So fill me in a little more. And
we've had a couple of different conversations about this as we work here together on your home.
Right.
And what we should and shouldn't say about the effectiveness of what we are or aren't doing.
Correct.
Because as you say, definitive statement is going to get us in trouble.
Absolutely. That's just... If you don't know that out there, do not make definitive statements about anything. Always throw in a qualifier somewhere.
Well, he does make a joke about this, and I didn't write them all down. I thought there was a couple of them that were funny. But the one that I did write down was, surely that's not going to fit in there.
Right.
One of them.
Yes.
And I know that he lists about 3 or 4 others, and I just thought, when you read that, I thought, it's right in par with some of the logics that we've talked about before.
Well, I'm not going to use any names or any institutions, but what I like to do is I tell my friends and family some of my ideas on how the world works. And they all look at me like I'm an idiot. And then it happens to them.
Yes.
And then they say, now I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. And I have a friend who has kids, and he's got 3 children, and the oldest one was about to start college. So they went out looking at different universities all over the country, some upper echelon schools. Mm-hmm. And he gets to one that he absolutely hated everything about.
Oh, really?
The people, the administrators, the campus, the students, just everything grated on him. So they get back in the car and they're on their way home from this one. And he's like, I do not know where you're going to college, but I do know you're not going there. He said, guess where all 3 of my kids went?
Oh,
no. So he says, I understand fully. Now, when I say definitive statement, you cannot fool the universe.
No.
Like, I'll never win the lottery. That's not
I'm going to repeat that every day
yes.
for the rest of my life now.
You have to believe with every fiber of your soul what you're saying.
You mean like, surely that's not going to fit in there.
Exactly. Because it will.
Oh my gosh. But I thought when you read that part, you would have flagged that immediately.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I don't know if I wrote anything in my notes, but I definitely remember that now. In our discussion about this book, due to its length and enjoyment, we have compared it to Doctor Who and the Cricket Men.
Correct.
Well, when Wallbagger's longship, that formerly belonged to Thor, the name always escapes my head, and unless it's sitting in front of my face, I'll never remember it.
Yep.
But when it landed, it instantly assumed the shape and texture of a grassy hillock.
Yes.
It's a TARDIS.
I thought the TARDIS always looked like a
police box.
Yeah, a police box.
It does, because his is broken.
Okay.
It has a chameleon circuit that is supposed to blend in with its surroundings. Mm-hmm. But the last place it was on Earth, and the circuit broke. Oh. And so it's stuck in the police box thing. But it's supposed to change shape and just blend in wherever it goes. So the field where they landed, and it turned into grassy hillock, it's full of the same cows that are served at the restaurant at the end of the universe.
That's correct.
They're sentient and they want to be eaten. They also hate pigs.
Oh, yes. Did you want to talk about the poodle-tink birds? Because I don't want to talk about the poodle-tink birds.
The word or words poodle-tink birds does not appear in my notes anywhere.
They're obviously flamingos, but why we have to be tortured with continuous and incessant conversation that flamingos might have, I have no idea.
I don't either. And there's too much to talk about already without talking about poodle-tink birds.
Ridiculous. That's what I wrote.
Yeah. Something that was a little bit amusing about the Tyromancers and the cheese religion and E-Damnation is when Wallbagger landed and he met them, he was excited because Wallbagger knows the cheese, as you had mentioned. And Wallbagger said the cheese is not as big of a deal as they think. And he was overly amused by all of their rituals. He thought E-Damnation was the funniest thing. And making the triangular sign of the cheese, where everybody would hold their hands up in a triangle. It's the sign of the cheese. So, I don't know. I find it funny when you write something ridiculous and then you write in the book about somebody making fun of what you wrote that was ridiculous. but it's way after you started writing how ridiculous it was. So did you plan on making fun of it, or as you got through the story, you all of a sudden realized how ridiculous it was and just decided to make it ridiculous? I don't know, but I liked when he made fun of it, but I don't like that it even existed in the first place.
Oh, man.
Oh, I have a guide note. Sorry, folks.
Oh, no, not another guide
This is
note,
the very
Jeff.
end. There is a theory postulated by Schick Brithius, the controversial bone doctor from pre-telepathy Kekrafun Kappa, which states that the universe is built on uncertainty and that a definitive statement action creates a momentary energy vacuum into which flows a diametrically opposing statement action. So, yes, I did absolutely have that written down. Chapter 10.
Is that where we find some moving targets?
I guess so. We've already talked about the cows.
Oh, flashing lights.
Oh, man, you were talking about the misogynistic nature of this book. This is where it's overly relevant or
prominent.
Prominent's a good word. Anyway, Thor and Wildbagger arrive to opposite ends of a scorched field for this showdown because Wildbagger wants to die. Zaphod promised he could kill him. Zaphod knows Thor, brought Thor there. This is it. This is where Thor's going to kill Wildbagger. It's going to be put on the Sub-Etha. It's going to go viral, and Thor's going to be back on top.
Right. And it's always funny because, I mean, at least Owen tries to be consistent, because no matter what Zaphod is doing next in the story, he's already forgotten about what he was doing 10 minutes ago.
Yes,
So even though he's followed through with his threat promise, he's every time he gets to the next place, he's forgotten why he was threatening or promising to do anything.
Yes, absolutely. So Thor is worried that his chance to change his reputation and have a positive viral video on the Sub-Etha will go wrong, because a god killing a non-god can be a tricky thing if it's not done correctly. And as we mentioned, Wildbagger's having second thoughts because newly found interest in Trillian, Thor's ex.
Right.
It's not just the long ship that he's...
Trillian and Thor met at the party.
Yes.
And Thor was hitting on Trillian, and then Arthur had to step in and to steal her away.
Right.
And it's funny because they mentioned at some point, that gods never forget, but Thor has forgotten about the interaction with Arthur. But then he kind of does a little caveat and says, I must have been too drunk.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So Wildbagger's talking with Trillian, trying to decide whether or not. And in this, he says all the wrong things.
Right.
And he is said to have said the three worst possible things, yes, that you can say to a female across all species. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with the list? Or are they all rewriting of the one thing?
That's a good point. I think they may, in fact, be.
So number 3.
Yes.
That was just physical. It meant nothing to me. It's pretty bad, but of the worst things you can possibly say...
We're not going to have this blood conversation again, are we? So,
number 2, even as we mated, they were growing old. Again, in the list of worst possible things you can say, I don't know. And now this is the one that's almost the same as the second one. You may be growing old, but you have years left before you're too old to reproduce. Not a good thing to say, but I'm not even stretching my imagination, and I got a dozen worse possible things.
Yep. Oh my gosh. So at this point, we're about to have the showdown between Wowbagger and Thor.
Okay, yes.
And Zaphod and Ford get back together.
Zaphod and Ford were standing together reminiscing. Arthur came up to tell them that the Vogons were on the way.
Mm-hmm. During their reunion, they enjoy one of those sea dragon egg drinks.
Right.
Which blows their mind. So they finally have a different drink to drink. But of course, getting these sea dragon eggs is something very difficult to do, and Wowbagger just happens to have a small supply
of course
on
he
hand.
does, yeah.
Oh, gosh. This is where the fight begins, right? Is that what you got?
Yep. It was a staged fight, and Wowbagger sent it off script because he just started throwing insults at Thor, and Thor got mad and pummeled him with a single blow. And up and over, I believe, is what he said.
And over, yes. And drove him 50 feet into the ground, just like our friend Marvin.
Yes, when he fell out of the cup.
That's right, fell out of the cup. That was in the radio show. But it is funny, because the cup is actually mentioned. Or not the cup, right? The statue.
The statue is mentioned, yes.
Mentioned in this book, which is interesting, because, of course, I think we mentioned earlier that there's some radio show references in this book which don't appear in any of the series of books themselves.
Correct.
Including the very beginning, where the radio show talks about going to the restaurant at the end of the universe with their Babelfish.
Right.
Which we mentioned before.
Yes, we did. So anyway, Wowbagger, being an immortal, did not die from this pummeling and being sent 50 feet into the ground with Thor's hammer, because Thor can still hear a heartbeat or sense brainwaves or something. And this is where we were talking about that the U-Bid's final delivery happened and Random got her package.
Right. It's interesting in this. I mean, it's kind of fun as a contextual thing, where U-Bid, the company, has been disbanded.
Right.
But Random actually bought these rubber bands.
Correct.
From the accident that occurred where Wowbagger became an immortal. So supposedly, if this rubber band is part of
if an artifact that made the immortal
is involved with the immortal's death, that it could possibly happen.
Right.
So she buys these rubber bands from a priest at the Wowbagger religion school.
Because those would be something that you would want to just sell to somebody.
Yes, exactly. And it was way back in ancient history,
right,
that the priest was alive, and the rubber bands were available, and so the U-Bid vehicle has been traveling for generations and generations, and the individuals on the U-Bid ship have maintained and cobbled it together and have been given this delivery as their final act for how many ever generations, we have no idea.
Right.
But this is their final act of delivery, where a small robot arm extends out from the ship all the way to Random, takes a sample of her DNA, and hands her the bag with rubber bands in it.
Yes. And she gives the rubber bands to Thor and says, "Put these on your hammer." And he's like,
"Nothing goes on my hammer."
Right. Yeah, and then eventually she tells him why, and he's like, "Oh, all right." And there we go. Puts these rubber bands around. Another thing, too, that we didn't explain is that he was talking about there needed to be appearances. Well, Thor, like the Valkyries, is gigantic compared to human-sized people.
Right.
Wowbagger might be tall for a human, but he's not a giant.
Right.
So Thor shrunk himself down.
Right, to make him look small. Thor's little tiny, puny little individual.
Right.
While Wowbagger's huge. And, of course, as Wowbagger is insulting him,
he gets bigger.
He gets bigger and bigger and bigger because he gets more and more offended. And then he whacks him with the hammer,
Right. So in the next go-round, after Wowbagger finally crawled out of the hole, Thor hit him and sent him into the stratosphere.
And of course, during all this, we've got far too much chatter about cows and poodle-tink birds.
Yes.
For my tastes.
Absolutely. I left all that out.
I noticed. But it's going on.
Thor had the rubber bands on the hammer. He injured Wildbagger incredibly. So
this time he shot him off into space.
Yes. As Wildbagger is flying up in the air and into space, but not outside of the gravity well,
Mm-hmm.
Ford walks up and says the truest words of the book. He says, "Hey guys, this isn't really fun anymore."
Yep. And at this point, I'm thinking the same thing as Ford.
Yes.
But I wrote a note saying, Trillian kisses Arthur, Arthur helps Trillian. Trillian, of course, faints as Wildbagger goes flying into the air, I believe. Or into the ground. I don't know which of the two.
Right,
Or both.
So anyway, when Wildbagger finally landed,
Uh-huh.
his immortality leapt out of him.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't die,
Right.
but he is now no longer immortal.
Mm-hmm.
And he told Thor that he wants to live
Mm-hmm.
and not to kill him.
Right. Zaphod came up with an idea, uncharacteristically, but true.
Yes.
and said, if you renounce the cheese, then we can get ourselves out of this situation, essentially.
So he did, and he took Trillian off, and they're going to go insult people.
Right. And I did get a little bit of a kick out of that little scene, of course. Zaphod calls himself an agent of chaos,
Right.
which seems appropriate. And Wildbagger is talking to Trillian and says, hey, do you want to go and insult these people? And Trillian says, well, what are they like? And Wildbagger says, well, they're complete assholes. Just like the Arthur insult, which, as you remember in the story, Arthur wakes up every morning in his cave screaming.
That's
and
right.
We learn here that it's because he is haunted by Wildbagger's insult.
Correct. So now we're to chapter 11.
Yay, chapter 11!
And Jeltz is with his son, Moan, and they are on their way to eradicate the Earthlings on Nano.
Mm-hmm.
So Hillman Hunter brought the God contract to Thor and Zaphod noticed that there was a protection clause that got penciled in at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And it merely says that the presiding god, Thor in this case, is responsible for protecting the planet from alien attack. Big lasers or nukes or the like. So it seems Hillman knew.
Well, Hillman had been talking to Arthur.
Oh, true. True. Yeah,
and Arthur had explained to him that the Vogons' threat was imminent.
Right. But they thought it was going to be a ways away.
Right. Well,
Zaphod was saying, hey, it's so far.
Zaphod figured that, but then they do make a pretty kind of a funny little joke about that. Zaphod literally says, well, in my calculations, it'll be so many years or so, decades before they get here. And then Ford kind of laughs to himself and understands that the man can't count, let alone calculate anything. So he has no faith that he's got an estimation of when the Vogons are actually going to be there. But the Vogons show up.
Yes. And this is a real struggle. I mean, it's a lot of tension between a father and a son who are growing apart. I mean, it should have been gripping, but the way it's done isn't, because they still try and throw comedy in there somehow. It's kind of weird, and it's the Vogons, and it's hard to have compassion about Vogons, even if it's the first one to evolve.
With the Barbie mirror.
Yeah. So Jeltz is about to fire his beams onto Nano, and Moan says, stop! And that's when you were talking about poetry punishment.
Yes, poetry punishment.
So he needed an excuse for stopping Jeltz for doing this, and he discovered that there's an immortal on the surface, and, their weapons aren't going to kill an immortal.
Right. Moan knows that there's laws against killing an immortal, or at least rules that they have to follow when they attempt to kill a mortal. So he uses that as an excuse for why he told his father to stop.
Right. And Jeltz bought it.
Right.
So first off, we discover right now that Jeltz has a super secret weapon that can kill a god.
Yes.
That's not what they were going to use.
No.
So they would not have killed Thor.
No.
When they blew up the planet.
No.
But they would have blown up all the Earthlings.
Yes.
Which was their job.
Correct.
But they wouldn't have killed the god.
Mm-mm.
So there was no reason to stop.
No.
But Jeltz didn't realize that because his son fast-talked him around.
Yes, the first intelligent Vogon.
Right. There's a couple of things in here.
They do say fire upon at some point or some level. Who knows?
Yeah, I just felt that wouldn't have been a real reason. Our weapons won't hurt the god.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to worry about that. And there's probably a form for that. So through this, and we might hit on a couple of more points, but this was really bugging me from the beginning, is the Vogons are all rules and regulations and forms and signed in triplicate and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeltz doesn't know them backwards and forwards.
He is by the book Jeltz, so he's supposed to.
By the book. So I don't think he could be bluffed with regulations and not have all of the other regulations that supersede or go around.
And he sort of does respond to Moan that way. And he allows him the questioning, the ability to question him. He says, okay, but he's an aggressor. And okay, but, these are the reasons why I can circumvent the regulations.
Right.
So he, I guess, Jeltz anyway, can allow his subordinate not to be as smart as he is. So he says, okay, well, you can interrupt me, but you're not right. I'm correct.
My only thing of why I can accept it at all is because he had the super secret weapon and he was happy to learn there was a god so he could use his weapon. So he's glad he stopped him because now he has this other opportunity which made it a forgivable offense. Arthur was finally able to change out of his schoolboy uniform and he got it regular clothes. Mm-hmm. I totally forgotten he was in another outfit. They never, ever, nobody ever said nice clothes or anything to him. So I totally forgot he was in a weird outfit. Mm-hmm. Ford came running up to Arthur and Random, and Arthur could tell by the look on Ford's face that the planet was about to be destroyed.
Right.
He's seen it before.
Yes, he has. He became an expert in it.
So Ford was able to discover the Vogons on the Subetha Imager on his copy of the guide, which is kind of a weird...
Right.
That never happened
No,
before.
because there were 3 different devices. He had the thumb, the guide... And I think it was the thumb that had the ability to detect ships.
Yes.
And they don't mention that
the thumb
here.
was the method that they called for a ride, and then it wasn't the guide that it was. And it's not
This is an updated version of it.
But when did he get it?
I don't know.
Well, it could have happened during so long.
Right.
When Arthur
he picked up a new version?
Yeah.
Because he's got...
And they just never needed to use the new feature yet, but now it happens.
Oh, gosh.
So Ford running caused this guide note. The general limit of Ford Prefect's exertion was hunting for the last clipper clam in the bucket and yanking it from its shell with clam tweezers. The most exercise Ford had ever done was when he had attained an ultimate supremo rating in the offensive art of Wang Do during a sojourn in the Hunian Hills Resort. Unfortunately, Hunian Hills is a mind-surfing resort, so Ford had only done this exercise in his head, a fact that became painfully clear when he initiated a bar fight on Jaglin Beta with 5 journals from the gadget periodical Big Knobs. Ford walked prehistoric Earth from England to Norway and back.
Well, not only that, he went to Africa.
Yes. So he traipsed for years. Uh-huh. And they're saying that the only exercise he's ever had is pulling clams out of their shell with tweezers.
And his sojourn on ancient Earth wasn't that long ago.
No.
I mean, we've talked about the sequence of events and how many days we think all of it occurred in. And it is very confusing, certainly for the time travel book, we don't really know, but once he got back on the bistro math, we think it was days.
Right.
In that whole story. So we're not talking about years between that kind of activity and today in this story.
Right.
So, yeah, that's an illogical leap.
Jeltz sends out a volley of missiles shrouded in holograms that look like flying horses.
Yes.
Thor goes to meet him and destroy them. Jeltz was happy because he could finally have a good test for Quest, quite unwieldy experimental sublimation torpedo. So Jeltz launched the Quest.
Experimental, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Jeltz launched the Quest at Thor, and Thor noticed it and went to intercept it. He did not recognize the explosives it contained. Here they put in this little line. It says, Thor remembered something that Zaphod had said, and then he wondered. And then at that moment, that bomb went off, and it seemed to encase Thor in a green cube. And then the green cube split up in a bunch of different cubes, and then they broke open, and dust rained. So in everybody's mind, Thor was gone.
Right.
Except for his helmet, which fell off of him, and Zaphod caught on his head. Mm-hmm. Which was really difficult because until a short time ago, he used to have two heads. So
he's darting around and bouncing up and down and yelling out souvenir, and it's a goofy scene.
And I know it's a helmet,
mm-hmm.
and I know it goes on your head.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he feel the need to catch it on his head?
Because he's Zaphod, and it's...
Again, to think about and try and manufacture a reason that's not stated in the book, as it was falling, it was sizing itself for Zaphod's head.
Right.
So the fact that it was going towards a head was making it get smaller to fit on the head, but if it was trying to catch it in his hands, it wasn't going for his head, so it would have stayed gigantic. I don't know if the helmet can tell intent or whatever, but that's...
Well, they do make a point in this story. They talk about Thor out in space using his hammer to destroy all the missiles. Mm-hmm. And they say, younger gods would have used the automatic targeting sequence. And they talk about the hammer is a piece of technology,
right? Not
what the stories of what the hammer supposedly is. That it's got tracking technologies and communication abilities and all of that kind of thing. And it does mention prior to that the helmet shrinks and enlarges as Thor does. But one of the things I thought was kind of funny is as Thor is getting ready to leave the planet and go up and battle the missiles, he's switching back and forth between what song he wants played.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
As he's battling them. And he's concerned that it appears good on the Tri-D and sub-Ethernet sensations. And he chooses the song You Want to Get Hammered.
Yes.
as his song to destroy these missiles with. And of course, everything's being recorded.
Right. And then there's a point in there where Arthur facetiously asks Ford if he had a bomb-proof towel.
Mm-hmm.
And Ford answered him in sarcasm. And Arthur was impressed. He's like, you're learning. Hey, you use sarcasm.
You know what was funny, though? I tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I'm not sure. At one point, Ford is on the ship, a Tengineer or whatever they call it in the ship, and he orders jelly. Remember the jelly with garlic?
Okay.
Remember that big, huge order of jelly with garlic? And the way they describe the bomb, and in a previous conversation, he talks to Zaphod about the jelly, the jelly experience, that the Quest is a bomb that Zaphod sold.
Correct.
To
the Vogons.
The Vogons.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is this huge cube that they describe, is it just jelly?
Jelly? Well, he had 300 gallons of it.
Yes.
Bounco jelly.
Bounco jelly.
Yes.
I'm thinking that this Bounco jelly is what this bomb actually is made to do, creates this huge cube of bounco jelly.
Could be.
And then divides up into these smaller pieces. Because Zaphod has no fear of this arrangement situation. Because he believes that he's sold these stupid Vogons a worthless bomb.
Right.
Which he has. But even Jeltz, after he's destroyed Thor with it, is so excited about the result that he's like, order more!
Yeah, right. And where would Zaphod get any kind of ingredients to make anything that looked like he had 300 gallons of bounco jelly?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I could believe that. So now that Thor was gone, Jeltz ordered a second volley of missiles. Mm-hmm. But before the gunner could push the button, Moan darted across the room and clobbered him with his drool cup. Mm-hmm. So what we never knew before is that there are drool cups that hang under the chins of all the Vogons. Mm-hmm. Once again, Jeltz was upset that his order was interrupted, and Moan was able to convince his dad that the Earthlings were actually not Earthlings because they were now tax-paying citizens of Nano.
Right, and Nano was registered, so they should not be killed because they owe taxes.
Right. What would it look like if you killed an entire population who owed back taxes?
And I think that's a common thing that most of our political leaders say to themselves every day. What would it look like if I killed a bunch of people that owed me back taxes? That's right.
So the Vogons leave, and Zaphod and Hillman give credit to Thor for saving the planet, promising he will come again when needed. Mm-hmm. Thor was to communicate to the people of Nano through Hillman, but he was cut in two by missile shrapnel that got past Thor.
Yes.
As he was dying, he said, "Oh, balls." Followed by the last words of his current lifespan, "Coming, Nano." And it said historians deleted the first phrase but kept the second, which was misinterpreted so many times that 15,000 years later, a third grade student misspelled it and accidentally arrived at the correct meaning. So it is saying that he was calling for his dead grandmother when he thought he was dying. "Coming, Nana," but they turned it into "Coming, Nano." So it was just...
I didn't get it. I now that you've explained to me what it was, I get it.
Don't like it.
I don't like it, but I
understand what he was going for.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's just it. He goes for things that don't necessarily get received the right way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when he does write something that I liked, I do want to point it out.
Right.
And the last chapter starts off like this. There is no such thing as a happy ending. Mm-hmm. Every culture has a maxim that makes this point, while nowhere in the universe is there a single gravestone that reads, "He loved everything about his life, especially the dying bit at the end."
And of course, they do mention the haraff here.
Right.
As the folks that live backwards.
Correct. That's right, yes.
But I do like that he says... that on Squanchalizita, the phrase is, "The mattress never stays dry for long."
Right. So, a new feature of the Heart of Gold. Hillman was brought back to the Heart of Gold, and in the meta ward, he was revived. Everyone had been a whole lot more willing to accept that he was Thor's representative on Nano because he came back from the dead. However, he now has goat legs.
Well, as we learn, Zaphod takes him onto the Heart of Gold and puts him into the med bay, and the only pair of legs he can find are goat legs.
Right.
And who knows why.
But Thor favored goats.
Yep.
So, people are taking it as a sign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I do love the line here, what they say that, well, that's the thing about BS. Once you start, you have to keep going.
Yes, absolutely. So here's where they start seeming to be wrapping things up into a happy ending, which they said just never exists. Mm-hmm. So Randa might enroll in a virtual school and get credit for some of the degrees she earned in the construct if she can pass the exams.
Right.
So if she can remember her 100 years of living going through all of these colleges, she should be brilliant and should be able to pass all of these exams. She's going to be an assistant for Hillman Hunter and help him rule Nano. And Arthur plans to stay on Nano with her. Zaphod is leaving on his own. Ford reminded him that Arthur is staying on Nano, so sooner or later, someone will try to blow it up.
And he expects Zaphod to show up with the ship on time to save them all.
Exactly.
And then we learn that at some point in the past, Zaphod has gone to Brontatal.
Yes. Yes, Brontatal was brought up.
And he stole the statue.
Yep.
I don't know how,
Right.
because it was huge.
Well, the Brontatal statue is the cup statue.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. It's the cup statue. And of course, he's sneaking away in the night with a sack full of gold that he's stolen from Hillman.
Right.
And Ford wants to know why he's not leaving with the parade. As Zaphod says, I took some cake mix from the Tyromancers and a microwave oven. And then Ford says,
Fruity. You can make hot cake.
and of course, he's really carrying around a bag of gold that he stole from Hillman.
Right. The clanking bag. It says that when Zaphod gets onto the Heart of Gold, he had reprogrammed all the doors to complement him. And then he got a message from Thor.
Right.
Saying that he had faked his death instead of becoming a martyr. And it's at this point that we actually find out that Zaphod sold the quest bomb to the Vogons.
Right.
And it had a lawnmower engine.
So it truly was Moan.
Oh, wow, yes. It says Zaphod wants to restart his campaign to regain his presidency. However, he needs to have his felony record reduced from first degree to second degree. And the person who needs to do that is Spinelli Trunco, the current president. So
he's like, what's the odds that that's going to happen?
Right.
But he's convinced he can do it.
He's convinced he can do anything, and he usually does it.
That's true.
So Constant Moan is happy he saved Nano, but there are a lot of other endangered species, and the trick he used to save the people of Nano, it's not going to work often, if ever again.
You live in a Barbie world.
Yes. Arthur was restless and he needed to travel again, but nobody would travel with him, so he traveled alone. He decided to check out the school Random attended on Cruxwan. During the hyperspace jump required to get there, Fenchurch momentarily materialized beside him. Then he became transparent and zoomed away, and he ended up on a beach similar to the one he lived in when he was in the construct. Except this beach had a small hut, and in the distance was a squat yellow shape. The Vogons were there.
Because there was a problem with the permit for the hut.
Right. Right. So when Arthur was on the beach at his hut, and in the distance was the squat yellow shape, the Vogons, he was actually told they were Vogons by a poodle-tink bird.
Jeez.
And then there was a guide note. And the guide note says this: Arthur Dent's almost incredibly bad luck created a providence vacuum, which led to unbelievably good fortune for a being on the other side of the universe. A certain Mr. A. Grajag, a little-known sportscaster from Unhigh, was successfully resuscitated after 6 months of near flatlines on his hospital monitor following a space collision with a U-bid cargo ship. One last U-bid reference. He awoke to a cocktail reception from the Planetary Lotto Committee to celebrate his numbers coming up as opposed to his numbers being up. At the same moment, his childhood sweetheart, who had recognized Mr. Grajag from his stint on Celebrity Coma, burst into his hospital room declaring her long-nurtured and genuine love. The pair went on to marry and had 2 well-adjusted children who had no wish to follow their father into show business, preferring to study law and medicine. Had Arthur Dent known about the Grajags, it may have cheered him up a little bit, but not much. The end of the Middles.
We do have to point out that earlier in the book, it does say that Middles can go Zark themselves.
That's right. That is right. So that's how the book ends.
That's how it ends.
Well, once again, I think Brian and I have experienced this so you don't have to. Or if you choose to, you kind of have an idea what you're getting yourself into.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we've come to the end of episode 2, I think we kind of did it in the beginning, but it was only a portion. Elevator pitch this book. What is this book? What's the story?
Oh my gosh.
There's not one story to me.
No, there really isn't one story.
There's not a through line from the beginning to the end. There's the same people.
Right.
But it's not a cohesive arc.
No, it really isn't. We're supposed to believe it's the salvation of the human race.
Right.
Through the intervention of gods and whatever. Gods in circumstance? I don't even know. It's gods in Zaphod?
Yes.
Which is, as he said, an agent of chaos. So it's represented chaos pretty well, I think.
Yes, it has. Yes, definitely has.
So I like you, I don't know that there's a straight line in this story. And we've repeated ourselves, I'm sure, but the parts with Zaphod and how he negotiated and did all this in what we think of as a blink of an eye, it's impossible to imagine. So we're missing pieces of this story quite thoroughly.
Yes, they go out of their way to tell you that Zaphod took the intelligent part of his head and strapped it to the ship, and the idiot playboy part of himself made all of these wonderful business deals, including selling a fake bomb to the Vogons.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole when of that happening, nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yep. But I do like the idea of green jelly destroying a god.
Yes. Yes. Favorite part of the smorgasbord is the green jello.
Jello molds! Oh, man. All right, Jeff, we've made it to the end of this book. It's been quite an adventure, I'd say. And I was, like I said, I really enjoyed the original reading.
Yep.
New material, something exciting. I have to honor at least Owen's attempt at being true to the vision that Douglas Adams has had. So some of the world building, some of the stuff that he did, I might not agree with, but at least when he was referencing things, he tried to stay true to the universe of Douglas Adams.
Yes.
Definitely enjoyed it quite a bit more than the Cricket Men.
Right.
So at least it gave me a good sense of satisfaction.
Right.
I'm excited for what's coming up next, and I understand you have some news about that.
Yes, I do. So next month will be our Season 2 wrap-up, where we kind of talk about everything that was happening in Season 2 and give you a little future of what we expect for Season 3. Now that we've gotten through the 6 books of the trilogy, we've been doing bonus episodes every month to have filler between the books and everything. But now everything that's left in regards to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy universe is all mostly bonus material.
Tangential, for sure.
Yes. So everything after this point, we're not going to do a bonus episode for October. And starting in November, which will be the first episode of Season 3, we're only going to do one episode, the main episode, which will really be a bonus episode.
Correct. Well, because we'll be covering Douglas Adams material, but it won't necessarily be Hitchhiker Guide
Related.
Correct.
And that first episode, in all likelihood, will be the radio version of And Another Thing.
Right.
If we run into something that's super fantastic that we just need to do a bonus episode, we'll put it out and let you know it's on the way. But we're going to relegate ourselves to one episode per month rather than the 2 and sometimes 3 that we have done lately.
Well, I think it's been a great ride, and I really do appreciate all the things that we've done together.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to what we have coming up. So I think it's about time to say goodbye, Jeff.
I think all I want to say about saying goodbye is I don't want the middles to end. I like middles.
They don't suck?
No, they don't. They don't. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram at Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. Zaphod's like, "It's Beeblebrox," shouted the frustrated galactic president. "You may not realize this, but every time you mispronounce my name, I feel bad. I'm a positive kind of person, but for some reason, that really hurts." And I'm reading all of this stuff or listening to it going, who is this guy?